10 minutes in.
Yeah, so I think for various reasons, and we evacuated to another part of Japan, found it quite difficult to get food that we felt there was a constant effort to find food for a child in view of the science on low dose still being somewhat uncertain. And we've ended up back in the UK. But I'm not really here so much to talk about my own experience, but I'd like to share with you some of the words and experiences of families who are still living there, either as evacuees from high radiation areas and moved to safer areas of Japan, or are still living in Fukushima. And if you have a look at the pictures there, this is a project that I did while I was living in Fukushima. These are all children that I work with to make these images, where they design the images and instructed me how to put their portraits in. So this is a direct communication from them to you, and I really appreciate the fact that you're looking at those. It's probably more interesting than anything I'm going to say, so it'll all just go now. But please do bear in mind, these are the actual children that you'll be hearing about in the news and will be argued about for decades to come, I imagine. So some of their experiences are, of course, they're all individual people, and their experiences are very varied. In terms of how they might conceptualise their experience, it will depend very much on the atmosphere and what's talked about in their family. And that tends to be divided somewhat between people who have access to more independent information, either independent media and the internet, or whether they rely on the mainstream media, that is mainstream broadcasters and newspapers, and you will get quite a different set of information. So the decisions that people make are very much coloured by those, and what they talk about at home, and what the children experience, and what food is fed to the children, and what happens in family life is dictated by that. There can be splits and fault lines. There are fault lines within individual families, within generations, grandparents, maybe disagreeing parents, within marriages, and quite a lot of families have had to separate because of that. And the children, that's one of the stresses that children might feel, as well as obviously grief if they lost somebody in the original tsunami disaster. What we're hearing from the families that we know in the networks that people are sharing are that the children have been experiencing health effects already. As Paul said, it's important not to jump to conclusions, but it's hard to understand why, for example, a teacher that I personally know witnessed 50% of his children's class, his noses bleeding at the same time. And this is a recurring thing that we hear, that children's noses are bleeding a lot. They're having respiration problems and immune system problems, as reported by some teachers and by many families. This is coming from lots of different areas. In terms of their emotional and mental well-being, it will depend on the degree of stress or the degree of fear or information they might have witnessed, added in with their own private world, because obviously when we're children, we kind of absorb bits and pieces, and then we create something inside of us that's a mixture of all kinds of facts and imaginations and fears and the things that are around us and that we hear. But it seems as if now what is emerging, which is one of the reasons I did the project, was because it seemed to me that the children needed a chance to express themselves. And what's coming out now is that there seems to be some children are experiencing quite a lot of emotional problems. Sometimes because they're staying there. I'll just give you an idea, just to give you a flavour. This is a mother living now who wrote this just a couple of days ago for us. My 13-year-old son said, "I live a normal life, nevertheless, if I think of my future and of my descendants, I think I'd better leave Fukushima. He also doesn't go near ditches because these spots have high radioactivity. Normally he just forgets about it, but he avoids bushes and embankments as well. Children can be influenced by their parents, and to be honest, I am scared of Fukushima. I feel that I'm being tricked. Highly contaminated water has been leaking very often. Fukushima Medical University is thriving. I feel there is something wrong." In Japan, there isn't a tradition of any kind of much sort of therapeutic responses to life. It's pretty much, get on with it and be strong. But the children are clearly asking for that, and that's perhaps something that the international community needs to think about offering to Japan, or to trying to empower local NPOs to be able to do that more. It's not happening in schools, for example. And some of the children are withdrawing and becoming quite angry and not engaging with school when they were quite clever before, and so on. And others seem to be coping quite well, so it is a really mixed picture. But they have actually been quite active in Koriyama, which is one of the high radiation areas that we saw on the map before. It does have hotspots. The teenagers were supported to take the prefecture to court to ask for a safe education, as is guaranteed by the Japanese education, and they lost. Their families have since moved away. Other children have spoken at the United Nations, have contributed to projects like this where they make pieces of writing and so on. So that generation of children will perhaps be quite engaged and involved, and it's good to see that they are being empowered to have that capacity to express themselves and so on, because they are going to need it. They're going to have a lot of attention on them one way or another. In terms of the evacuation situation in general, the prefectures in Japan have been very supportive, but that support is now ending. So a lot of the evacuees, if you come from a compulsory evacuation area, then the support may continue. But if you don't, and we saw that there's quite a lot of contamination, you may have moved away because you have concerns for your children, but your support may be ending and people are worrying they're going to have to go back. Also, some of the people who are campaigning about risk to children have been coming under scrutiny of the security forces recently. One female campaigner in Kyushu is going to be prosecuted because of a tweet she made which criticised part of the decontamination process. And others have been visited by the police. And Japan does seem to be moving to the right somewhat. And it's very concerning that those people speaking out now, the impression, the Secrecy Act, which we'll make here a little bit more about later, is going to make people more wary about speaking out. And it makes the situation for evacuees and families still living in Fukushima all the more difficult, and also for other populations and other governments very difficult, because if there's that much pressure on people who are sharing information and raising questions about it, we have to ask ourselves how trustworthy the information that we get out of Fukushima will be, how useful it will be. So I think that's a kind of wider point that we all need to be concerned about.
2 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I was getting worried then. I was thinking, I've got too much time. And perhaps if I could just finish off with a few more words from Japan itself. This is from an evacuee that did go back, as I mentioned. One reason for stopping the evacuee's life was school. I know that health is more important than school, but children spend long hours each day with school as their society. I'm not blaming school. However, children's injured hearts need to be considered, and there should be a system of counselling if they need it. I found private counselling for my son. He played by pretending there was a tsunami and earthquake. He started to behave like an infant after we were evacuated. It is a common symptom when you feel safe after a scary experience. I was advised to help him recover by accepting this, but school didn't do this. It's a shame. So she did actually move back home in order to feel supported by people around her. Please understand that some people have to decide to go back because of a variety of reasons like us. Please reach out your hands to those living in high contamination areas and those experiencing the hard realities of being a mother and a child living as evacuees. Thank you. Rather than answering a particular point, but it's something that's in the air whenever we talk about this kind of thing, and what I found as a parent when I was trying to understand this very difficult subject is that there's such a huge range of conflicting information out there. It's very difficult for parents, for example, who are trying to protect their children, to understand what's happening. And I've been trying to get a handle on why that. We've heard about links between the International Atomic Energy Authority and World Health Organization and so on. There are very many reasons, but I think when it comes down to it, if sufficient good quality research had been done, it would be very difficult to have such a fractious debate I would really like to see Fukushima being used much better than it was apparently going to be. So to give us a better legacy of information, because there seems to me, because it's been so hedged around with financial and political considerations in the Cold War, that it's very difficult for anybody to trust anything that they're hearing and to not be confused. So it makes it all the more important that Fukushima is used properly. And I think there needs to be a lot of attention from the international scientific community, as well as the safety engineers and so on, to ensure that that happens. For example, it appears that some doctors locally, for example in Tokyo, have noticed changes in their patients' blood, which reduces once they leave a radiation area. That seems to be possibly going to be having implications for a whole range of health issues. That's not being tested. Why is that? And because there seems to be more and more control of information, I think it's really important this opportunity isn't lost for giving us some more believable information that can help us all to feel a little bit more at ease, if possible, or at least to create some kind of credible scientific consensus.
Thanks very much. Would you like to?